Hello everybody and Happy New Year. Welcome to my first video in 2023, and today I want to talk about some news that actually broke last week, but with the holidays and everything I just have not gotten around to talking about it yet. But today is the day we are going to talk about it, and it is this news out of the Philadelphia Fusion camp, or should I say the Seoul Infernal camp, who announced that they are changing their name from the Philadelphia Fusion to the Seoul Infernal and moving from Philadelphia to Seoul. Now, I am under the impression that this move has been in the works for some time. It seems like at least as soon or as recently as June of last year, 2022, they kind of had this decision that they were going to move to Seoul. Obviously, they've been in the APAC region for a while at this point in time, 2 years now, and wasn't sure if they were going to come back or not, but clearly they are sticking around in the Eastern region and Seoul in particular. Let's just read some of the information or some of this press release that they have. I will link it in the description if you want to see it. Read the whole thing. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it, but it says here, Philadelphia Fusion rebrands as Seoul Infernal, shifting team operations to South Korea. Overwatch League franchise reveals rebrand, looking ahead to new year and next generation of esports. Today, Overwatch League team Philadelphia Fusion announced plans to rebrand itself in the new year as the Seoul Infernal and relocate to South Korea, where the team has been operating for the past 2 years. The team, founded in 2017, initially moved operations to South Korea at the onset of the COVID pandemic in early 2020 in close coordination with Overwatch League officials. Quote, as we gear up for next season, we've been evaluating how we can best compete at a consistent championship level, and we've realized that our franchise will be best positioned to succeed in Seoul, end quote, said Dave Scott, president and CEO of Comcast Spectator, which owns the Infernal franchise. Quote, we're excited to begin this next chapter as the Seoul Infernal, and our team is proud to represent our current and future fans on the global stage, end quote. Then they go on to talk about Seoul and the Infernal name and whatnot, saying that it's going to maintain the same ownership, management, and roster of currently signed players, and obviously they'll have new additions, stuff about moving to Seoul, and T1 and history, all that type of stuff. So like I said, link in the description to the full press release in the description if you want to check that out. But I figured I would take some time just kind of talk about this move, my thoughts on it, and generally speaking, what I think the overall kind of what this means for the league as a whole. So in general, I don't really have an issue with the Fusion moving to Seoul. I think it makes sense when you consider what they are. In general, the teams in the APAC region are teams that represent things in APAC, the exception being the Valiant, which most people have already been calling for that team to relocate officially anyway. The reason, though, why I think these two situations are different is that the LA Valiant kind of basically lost all their fans anyway because people were very critical of the organization and how they handled a number of things back in 2021. But also there's already another team in Los Angeles, so it just made more sense to say, let's move this team somewhere in China, whether it be Beijing, which is the kind of the big one that a lot of people push for, but I'm sure there's other places you could think of as well in China, other cities. I mean, they could go Hong Kong, though they don't really have a Hong Kong presence. They are just a Chinese presence. So something like Beijing, of course, is kind of the main thing that a lot of people will push for. With the Fusion, is a different situation because the Fusion were the only team in Philadelphia, and so now Philadelphia does not have a team with the move to becoming the Seoul Infernal. And so I think that is definitely something to discuss, think about, talk about, and that is definitely the biggest problem with this move, is that you are leaving behind a fan base of very dedicated fans and a very, 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 very popular team that has had one of the most kind of storied and successful runs in the Overwatch League, and generally speaking has had one of the most dedicated fan bases in the league. Now, obviously, this isn't the first team to do some sort of relocation with the Eternal moving to Vegas, also for next season. We've also had other like small rebrands, like color changes with teams like the Valiant, who've done it twice, the Mayhem, the Shock. So there's been a kind of rebrands and stuff like that in the league already. This is the first full kind of city change, name change, rebrand we've seen so far. But I think in general, I don't really have an issue with this. I genuinely don't think that them moving is that big of a deal, except for the fact that Philadelphia now no longer has a team. I've seen a lot of people say that they wish that they changed their name to a different Korean city, or they went to a different Korean city. And in some ways I agree. I think if they were the Busan Infernal or some other city in Korea, Busan's kind of the second major city when it comes to especially like esports in Korea. But the fact of the matter is they have been operating out of Seoul for the past several years. They don't want to then relocate to Seoul and then be Busan, right? They're going to where they are, right? They're in Seoul, and that makes sense. And I think if there is a city that I think should have two teams in the Overwatch League, it should be Seoul. South Korea should have had a second team a while ago. It is the mecca of esports. It is the city where the majority of just things in general happen really are in South Korea and Seoul in particular. So to me, it's not really that big of a deal that Seoul is getting two teams, because to me, it should be a city that has two teams, right? LA having two teams made sense because it was in 2018 and 2019 where the Overwatch League was. So LA having two teams made sense. I've seen some things about, the market value, how this kind of could potentially hurt the Seoul Dynasty. Would they be okay with such a move? But I think it doesn't really hurt them, because the reality is Seoul has so many fans, and the Fusion have already had their fan base. The Dynasty have already had their fan base. I don't think this move is going to hurt either one of those teams necessarily. And I think it creates a nice regional rivalry that will really be a good part of the Overwatch League, because the Dynasty have kind of had this minor rivalry with the Fusion for a while. They've had this rivalry with the Dragons for a while. But now that you have two teams in Seoul, I think you really get to kind of have that natural rivalry that did develop because they were the two teams that were in Korea last season. Now they are both going to be in Korea using the Seoul name. They're going to be kind of fighting for the city. The battle for LA was always one of the best rivalries for a long time. It just ended up not being great after the Valiant kind of collapsed and fell apart and became not a very good team. But for a while, it was the best rivalry in the league. And I think Seoul versus Seoul will be a good rivalry. So I don't really have an issue with this move, personally. And I think the big thing is, if you're a Philadelphia fan, it stinks. But I also think it's kind of the recognition of, if you're a fan of the team and you're from Philadelphia, like, this team was clearly going to be staying in Korea and wasn't planning on moving, most likely, back anytime soon. And so if you're a fan, you're staying up till, you're either staying up until super early in the morning to watch it, or getting up super early in the morning to watch the team. And that's just not fair to the fans of Philadelphia. I would rather them say, hey, we're going to move because we don't want to basically force all of our fans to get up early in the morning to watch our games, because at the end of the day, like, we are not going to continue to be a part of this community. And I think there's kind of like a positive and a negative to that, because the reality is, if I were a fan of the Fusion and the team kept being in the APAC region, and it just kind of continued this disconnect between the team and the fan base, I'd be annoyed. I'd rather you just kind of rip the Band-Aid off and say, we're going to move, and kind of leave open this future for Philadelphia potentially later. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if we're going to get another Philadelphia team at any point in time. I think it'd be really cool if the Valiant moved there. The problem with the Valiant is that they're awful as an org. So they'd have to sell it to somebody. But I think in general, the Philadelphia Fusion and the Philadelphia team spot is probably just going to go by the wayside, which, like I said, is awful for fans of Philadelphia sports. And if you're from Philadelphia, it's rough. That's two teams from the Western region, or two teams from the Atlantic kind of region, moving west, or east in the case, I guess, of the Seoul Infernal, leaving the east coast of North America and moving to the other side of the world with Vegas and with Seoul. So it's interesting, right? I think it is an interesting move. I don't, like I said, I don't think it's a problem or a bad move. I hope that in something like esports, where it really shouldn't matter, I think there is this idea that a lot of people have had where, like, what's the point of representing cities if you're just going to move? Well, this is why. Like, it makes more sense for them to move. Like, they're not playing in Philadelphia. They're not representing Philadelphia at this point in time. So why should they stay Philadelphia, right? It makes more sense to me for them to rebrand, because I would rather them just rebrand than be milking the Philadelphia community and Philadelphia fan base without really being a Philadelphia team. And they did a lot of really good things, in my opinion, to embrace Philadelphia. Like, there's that cheesesteak place in South Korea that they took the players to, and they would do a lot of things to kind of connect to Philadelphia sports. But at the end of the day, I think it just makes sense to say, hey, we're going to move, we're going to rebrand, because it kind of makes sense to be a team that is representing the place where you're actually playing. And that, to me, is one of the things I think is good. Like, we see that with the Shanghai Dragons and the Chinese teams. Like, even when they had Korean players, they were still playing in China because that was what they wanted to do. They wanted to actually represent the place where they were playing. The Fusion weren't doing that, right? The Excelsior moved back to New York this year specifically to be kind of representing the place where they were playing after playing in the Asian region for a while. So to me, it just makes sense, right? Like, I don't have an issue with it. I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is to be true to the fans who you are going to represent. Seoul is going to be more accurate for the fan base of this team because that is where they are. It's where they operate. It's the type of thing where, at the end of the day, I would rather this team operate out of the place that their team represents. And to me, the smart thing to do is just accept what direction you want to take your team and make that your representation. That's my belief. I know some people might disagree with me. That's just my thoughts, and that's just my take on it. But I would love to hear from you, kind of hear your opinions on it. Do you think that this move is a big deal? Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Whatever it is. I would love to hear your opinions because I know a lot of people have different opinions on it. I've seen both sides of the story. If you're a Fusion fan in particular, or a former Fusion fan, I would love to hear from you as well. What are your thoughts on this? Does this bother you? Does this annoy you? Or are you okay with the move? Do you think it is kind of the best thing for this team at this point in time? Whatever your take is, I would love to hear from you. But that is going to be all from me for today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, especially as we move into the new year and as we move into roster breakdowns and 2023 Overwatch League content, make sure you like, subscribe, so you can get all of that content when it comes out. But that's going to be all from me for today. Thank you all so much once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.